I know you've heard the saying, the right tool for the right job. If you want to dig a hole, you probably need a shovel. If you have a poltergeist exercising its authority over the dishes in your kitchen sink, you probably need an exorcist. And if you want to get smooth FPV footage near or around people, moving objects, you probably want a cinewhoop. Hey everybody, I'm Bacon Ninja, and today we're going to be looking at the SpeedyBee Bee35 cinewhoop. No, it is not the first cinewhoop on the market. But this frame has some special features, especially the Pro version, that I think are worth taking the time to talk about. Because you might be looking for a cinewhoop. Like I said in the intro, if you want to take stable footage around people, you probably need guards around your props. Now, none of these are actual ducks because we just don't do that. Ducks require a measure of precision between the prop and the duct itself that we just do not achieve with FPV quads, except for the squirt. That's a whole different category. But these are guards, so it keeps your props off the fleshy bits of the people you're flying around, or the cars you might be flying around, or through the house you might be flying in. It's just an added level of protection. Along with that, cinewhoops are usually really good at carrying cameras, bigger batteries, longer flight times, and they stay stable in the air because they're so heavy. Now, they do have their downsides, and we're going to talk about that too, but this one in particular is a little bit of a special beast. The B35 Pro is fully compatible with the DJI O3 system in the front. It's got the vibration isolation system, and in the bottom, it actually has a place where you can dump the VTX that's completely made of aluminum to keep the heat out, because the heat is real with the O3 system, and a lot of companies are using aluminum heat sinks to drain the heat right out of that O3 unit. This is no different. SpeedyBee has machined their own aluminum bottom plate for this. That's what sets it apart from something like the other cinewhoops on the market. But it also has great quality of life features like this recessed USB in the back that's relocated from the stack, the ability to change this top plate here and reorient your battery strap, and the ability to just pop 6 screws out and have the entire quad come apart so that you can work on it. You can get straight down into the stack. It's fully compatible with AIO stacks, 25x25 whoop stacks, 20x20 stacks, and 30x30 stacks, with a caveat that we'll get to here in a minute because there's a big caveat when you're running a big stack. And although this camera isolation platform is not standard equipment, you do have to purchase it separately. It is available, and it's very similar to something like you see on the Cinelog 35 with its isolation dampening GoPro mount. And we'll see some footage from it in a minute so you can kind of get a feel for what the footage out of that bones is doing on top of this thing. But first, let's talk about those quality of life features, because that is what makes this quad an option in the market. We have so many different frames. Why do we need another one? Well, this one brings some pretty cool stuff to the table, and we're going to go into that a little bit more. First off, being this USB relocation. They actually provide 2 different ways to relocate your USB, one with a micro and one with a C, so that no matter what stack you can use the built-in USB-C at the back of this quad to run the cables up to your stack and permanently plug the USB in. That way you can just plug into the back of the quad instead of having to rip this whole sucker out every time you want to get on a beta flight. Of course, this is a SpeedyBee product, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a SpeedyBee stack in this one. I built this. They sent me the frame. SpeedyBee provided the frame free of charge. They did not pay me for this review or my opinion, and I crammed it full of my own parts. So I chose a SpeedyBee F405 Mini for this, which does have the wireless connectivity. So technically, I don't need this USB relocation. But if I want to flash the ESC or anything else in there, I totally can without cracking it open, which is really nice. In that same mount at the back, and I don't have it on mine, is an adjustable GPS mount. You can put a GPS back there and make it point whichever direction you want. I'm not a fan of GPS. I don't have it on this quad. It's just not something I take the time to put in, but a lot of people are, and if you lose your cinewhoop, you'll probably appreciate it, and you can put that in the back here. Along with all of the USB and GPS mounting options, there's a lot to do with antennas, and it really is well set up for the O3 antenna if you plan on running the stock antenna, along with ELRS or Crossfire sitting across the top here. The design for this 3D print, it is 3D printed, but it's really good quality 3D printed, in TPU is very good. It's a really well thought out design. There's a place if you want to run an SMA antenna. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with this. Now, this battery strap mount is a point of contention for me. I like the idea. If I want to toilet tank my battery on this cinewhoop, I totally can. And I don't have to tear the whole quad apart or relocate the battery strap by pulling it around the stack inside. I can just take the 4 screws out of this top plate, which are not responsible for holding the stack down in any way, and rotate it. And with that, I will rotate my entire battery strap arrangement. It is really tight though, and as you can see, I'm using the stock SpeedyBee strap that was provided with the frame. It fits in there, but it is really, really tight. I had to cram this sucker in. And the little holes that you're supposed to use to run it through the piece of carbon that is the topmost part of this frame, yeah, they're not going to fit either. So just plan on cramming that thing in there. It's really not that big of a deal, though, because in the end, it's not messing with your stack. The screws aren't going through the stack, and it's just between 2 plates of carbon. So if you're squishing the Velcro in there, it's really not that big a deal. But you're not going to be pulling the strap in and out. It is literally going nowhere. And if you have a hard crash with this and you're using an insufficient strap, that is a place where it will probably break, because it's not going to slide around the plate. It is going to stick there, and it is going to pull on it very hard. So plan on using a good strap. If you're building something like this, you are probably going to put the quality parts in anyway. I just need to let you know that's possible. And now we get to the bottom plate, the star of the show for this Pro frame, holding the O3 Air Unit. It has cutouts so that you can get to the SD card, the USB, the binding button. It has vents, and it's made of 100% machined aluminum. Now, machined, I'm not so sure it's 100% machined. It could be bent, but you can tell there's definitely machining done on here. It is not a cast piece of aluminum, and this is an expensive part to make. Now, I haven't mentioned it yet, but the Pro frame is 40 bucks. The whole frame is 40 bucks. Like I said, that does not come with the GoPro isolation camera mount on top. That's a separate piece, but what you do get is all the necessary prints, all the necessary parts. You can use the standard GoPro mount without the isolation feet, or just for a few more dollars buy the isolation mount. It's a really good frame. The ducts themselves are nice and strong. It's cheap to replace them. They're fairly easy to replace, but now let's get to the downsides of this frame. And as I crack it open, you'll see. Sheet hoit. There's a lot going on in there, and I have crammed my wires to the max. I have an ELRS receiver janking around in there. The O3's on the bottom. It's held on with a TPU printed piece, which is kind of nice, and you can use a lot of other VTXs, even on this Pro frame. You could use a Vista. You could use the new HD0 V2 Freestyle. Anything 25 by 25 will go in there. I don't think you're going to get away with like a Freestyle VTX V1 from HD0 or Walk Snail. It's going to be really hard, but you can do analog in there in a 20 by 20, 25 by 25 configuration, and the O3 system, the Vista, and the new HD0 Freestyle V2. It will all cram in there, and it will still dissipate the heat. But the problem is the height. You've got to pick a stack that will work with this. Now, I'm using a 20 by 20 2-part stack. It's the SpeedyBee F405 Mini, and it is very, very tight in there. It's so tall that I can't run wires between the O3 and the flight controller because we're hanging the stack upside down in order to get the top plate clear for the battery. And the O3 is just tall in there. Even though it sits down in this aluminum plate, it is just a nightmare to cram everything in. And then getting it in there with the harness, you can't put the O3 in and then plug the harness in. You've got to plug the harness in and then put the O3 in the plate. And then you've got to do your soldering outside of that. Now, hopefully your flight controller has a plug and you can just unplug your O3 from that. My F405 Mini does not have a plug for that, so I had to solder it on, which means that I can no longer permanently separate these two items. Unless I yank the O3 out, my flight controller is forever attached to the bottom plate of this thing, which is kind of rough. So if you're going to build this, plan your parts accordingly. I would go with something like maybe the Argus F7 AIO that has a good amp rating and actually really good performance. I've been driving that thing a whole lot and I really like it, but we'll keep the height minimal so that you have more room for your wires. You are really going to want to consider the wiring, the wire routing when you're building this. Trust me, it is definitely something to think about. So now it's time to see how it performs and what you should and shouldn't do with something like this, because being Bacon Ninja, the first thing I did was stuff you should not do with a cinewhoop. I spanged it like this, and you can see that it's not a spang beast, but it's not designed to be a spang beast. Yes, you can do this stuff. No, it will not be stable. It will have prop wash to hell, and it will fight you the entire way, but it totally can do it. Now, again, I'm going to remind you, I built this quad, so I spec'd all the parts. This has 1604 3000 kV motors on it and 5-blade HQ props. which are probably a little less responsive than you'd want. You might want to go with something like a 2203 motor on this, 3-blade props. If 2203s, maybe the 5-blade props would be fine, but I did 1604s to keep the weight down. And speaking of weight, this thing is over 300 grams dry, without the GoPro on top, around 310. Then you slap a GoPro on top, you slap a 1300 mAh pack on it. You see where I'm going here. It's going to be a heavy beast. Don't plan on this being a sub 250 cinewhoop. It's not going to happen in the 3.5-inch class. But you can get some really good footage out of this thing. This is out of the bones on top, and this is stabilized. I stabilized this with GyroFlow. I think that most people running a cinewhoop like this would likely stabilize the footage. It's just the natural thing that you're going to do when you want to take cinematic shots. Of course, I also have this, which is the DVR footage, and yeah, it flies just fine. This is out of the O3 Air Unit, basically stock settings. I could totally stabilize this too. I prefer the GoPro footage, but you can run this thing with no GoPro on top and get full use of the O3 because there's plenty of camera field of view without any of the plates in frame. So you don't have to worry about getting the side plates, the aluminum mounting plates in frame. You can totally do this with the O3 and no camera on top. However, I prefer this, the GoPro footage. It looks a lot better. Now, you might not want to stabilize it. So how stable is it before you stabilize it? Let me switch to that real quick. Here is the GoPro footage completely unstabilized, just so you can see what the flight characteristics of this thing are natively. Now, as far as tuning goes, I did not push the tune on this very far. I would recommend you don't ask me for the tune because I didn't spend a lot of time on the tune on this thing. So, if you're going to build one, just be aware that you probably want to tune it very well. It shakes a little bit. It is a cinewhoop. They are going to shake and they are going to have prop wash, and that is why we stabilize footage with them. But all in all, it does a very good job. It's not going to be a freestyle beast. It's a cinewhoop. But as far as the frame goes, the quality of life features for $40 are pretty freaking good. And if you don't want the Pro version, which basically means you aren't going to get the aluminum bottom plate and you're not going to get extra height inside to build with, then it's a little bit cheaper. You can also buy this as a bind and fly. They have the O3 with ELRS, with TBS for around $500, and then they have the analog version for around $250. And it is a tight build. This thing is hard to build. Don't get me wrong, the instruction sheet is sufficient. It's a very pretty instruction sheet. It doesn't give you step-by-steps. It gives you breakdowns of the frame, and you gotta kind of figure it out. Of all the drones that I've built, this one took me the longest to kind of put out in pieces on the table, figure out where things go based on the guide, and get it done. Then I had to figure out the cable routing and how to actually get things attached when they're so tight in there. It is not a fun time to build, but it is a great quad once you have it done if you've planned appropriately. Don't use stacks that are too tall. I would stay completely away from 30mm stacks in this. I would really start looking at a high kV, high amp AIO, and then I would use motors like a 2203 so that you get enough torque and authority to push this heavy sucker around whenever you want to, so that you get the most performance out of it. And you're going to want to run a pack up above 1,000 milliamp hour in 6S. I did do this for 6S, and I'd recommend that. 1,000 milliamp, 1,300 milliamp hour. I tried this on some 550 packs and some 850 packs, and I was getting 2.5 minutes or so, which is really low for a cinewhoop. So you definitely want to go 1,000 or 1,300, somewhere in that zone. And 6S is a good place to be so that you have enough authority through the entirety of the pack without any tapering off at the end. So I would plan around 6S for this. And to do that, you're going to want to be in the near 3000 kV range with your motors. I would look at the bind and fly specs and kind of get an idea of what they're doing there if you want to build your own and start with similar parts but in your favorite brands, or just buy the bind and fly, because that might be easier than spending all your time cramming the parts into this frame, because it is not a fun build. It is a fun thing to fly and it looks beautiful, but the build is kind of a nightmare. And if you've ever built a cinewhoop, I think that's a pretty universal experience. So that is not this frame's fault. That is the format's fault. But expect it. It's going to take you longer than you want. Just know that's going to happen. Anyway, let me know what your favorite cinewhoop is in the comments below. Tell me why you use cinewhoops, or maybe you don't and you want to. What do you plan on doing with a cinewhoop? I don't have a ton of cinewhoops. That's a secret. Not really, if you look at the wall behind me. I think I have one over here and one up there, and then this is the third one. I don't keep them around. I fly them and then I give them away most of the time, or let other people try them to learn on because they have prop guards. They don't fly well, but man, they have prop guards and they can get some really nice cinematic footage. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what you're doing with these things and what your favorite one is. And if this video was helpful, maybe give it a thumbs up. Nobody paid for this content. It's never vendor sponsored or paid for, so every little bit helps to keep the purplish lights on around here. Anyway, until next time, stay greasy, and I'll catch you later. So, as these patrons scroll across my greasy face, how do you like that cinewhoop spang? That was frightening for me to fly. I'm not gonna lie. It was hard to bail out, and yeah, I nearly put this quad in the ground several times. I nearly killed it. And when you're flying something ducted, killing ducks is not fun either. But at least spare ducks are easy to put on this thing. Yeah. I don't know. I like the spang. My first instinct is to always spang it. What's your first instinct? Probably not to spang it. It's probably to end this video, because that's the smart thing to do.